Hello, Michael here with another Renderman tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at how to light a studio render for a product, and the product that we're using in this tutorial is a bottle of whiskey, which I've already designed and done the materials for. So this is going to be a tutorial mainly about lighting and scene setup. So if you're wanting to know how to make the whiskey bottle, I'll do that in a separate tutorial. Okay, so to start off with, we have got the bottle of whiskey, obviously, that has been made, and we've got a floor plane, which is just a grid. And with the materials for the floor, we won't worry about that just yet. We'll get some lights and things first. So we're going to render as we go. You can see I've got the reference render already up on the screen, and what we're going to start by doing is put in a backdrop. And this is really straightforward. All we're doing here is creating another grid, and we'll just move this back and increase the scale. Then we will reduce it down to 3 subdivisions, and what we'll do is grab the rear 3 vertex, just move them up like that. So basically we get a nice curved backdrop that we can place a light onto. Just move that down and then move it up. Like so. So now when the camera is shooting into it, we should just see this backdrop only behind it. Talking about our cameras, we'll have a look at our camera. I've already placed it into the scene and set up its angle, but essentially all it is just centered on the bottle. Really straightforward. The lens setup for the camera is in a 100mm lens. Usually for this sort of product photography you would use a longer lens, probably usually longer than a 70mm, not necessarily, but generally I would say something longer than a 70mm. 80 to 100 would be about what you want. And we do want to use a little bit of depth of field, just so if you look at the reference image you get a little bit of fall off here between the foreground and the background. It blurs it out nicely. So we'll put a light in on our background so we can start to see what's happening here. So to do that, we're going to use a Renderman spotlight, which we'll do with a disc light to begin with. And we'll call this BG Spot. I'm just going to increase the scale of that. Now you'll notice that it is coming in with this white look to it. That is just an error because my previous light setup, there's a disc light in there, and when you create it with the same name, it kind of wigs out a little bit, so don't worry too much about that. This will actually still work just fine. Alright, so we will go to the refine, and then we're going to change the cone angle. So at 90 degrees it's going to go all the way out, but we're going to pull it in slightly like that, and then we can run our IPR off our shot camera. Okay, so we can just barely see the background, and what we'll do is increase the intensity to say 10. Alright, so we get a nice silhouette happening of our bottle, and that's what we're looking for here. So we will just change the softness a little bit. I just want that to gradiate outwards, so we can maybe just increase that cone angle. Something like that will do. Okay, so that's pretty good to start off with. We'll work on our values once we get a few more lights in the scene. But I want to vary up that background a little bit, so I'm going to add a material to our backdrop. So we'll select that and create a pixar surface, and we'll call this backdrop, and I'm going to use a material on it as well. So we'll jump into the Hypershade editor and just rerun that, grab a Voronoi and run the result RGB into the diffuse color for our backdrop. Diffuse color, and then when we render that, we'll start to see a little bit of variety in the background. Now this is not a necessary step, but I think it does add a little bit of something. If you've ever done studio photography, I have a background in photography, so this is sort of why I'm talking a lot about for the photography side of it, and it is worth knowing a bit about if you are into lighting and rendering, because it's all based on physical cameras and things like that. These sorts of things are worth looking into. So a lot of the time, if you're trying to emulate a real life studio setup, it is actually just worth looking into how it would be done in reality. So this is something that you would do in a studio setup, is just to have a matte background with a sort of random noise in it. You can add color and stuff to it if you want, but we're just going to keep it like that. And that frequency, I do want a little bit of contrast here because it's going to be out of focus. So I do want just a slight variety once it's out of focus still to be visible, even though it will be blurry. So that will probably be okay for the moment. Now the tricky thing with lighting this is that it is a glass material, and glass is very difficult to photograph because of its refraction and its reflections. So getting everything to line up just right so you don't get any weird highlights or anything like that can be difficult. But fortunately, when we're doing this virtually, we can actually light link and things like that. So we'll be doing a little bit of that. But the first thing we're going to do is get a rim light on so we can start to see our silhouette contrasted. So we'll jump back into our free perspective camera. And we'll do this with a large light that sort of is going to act as a light with a large box diffuser. And we'll render it like that, and we'll just position it based on its render. What we're looking for here is a nice bright line following the edge of our silhouette of our bottle. So we just need to make sure that the scale of this is large enough to get that reflection all the way along the side there. And that's pretty much giving us what we want there. We're getting a nice highlight all the way along the edge. If you wanted a more pinpoint highlight, you can use a smaller light, but for this side of the bottle, I'm just going to use a large diffuse light. And at a value of 1 or 2, I think will be fine, probably even just 1. And to check the values, what I do in the render is hit the F key, which is going to give our, hit the H key, which is going to give our luminance. So when we're looking at values, it can be confusing to look at your RGB colors. It can sort of throw you off a little bit. So we'll just look at luminance for now, and I think that's probably close to being correct. Yeah, I would say 2 is going to be the trick. But we're getting a lot of light bouncing off our background and off our ground plane. So what I'm going to do is go into rendering and light linking, and we'll just make sure that we'll call this box diffuse. We'll just make sure it is not affecting our, for the moment, floor or plane, which we need to change to be called backdrop geo. So now if we look at the comparison on the catalog, you can see that isolation that we're getting from that is quite good. It's probably a little bit too much there, but once we've got some more lights in the scene, we can move that around a bit to make it a bit better, because I don't really want to be seeing the light shape so much there. In a studio setup, you'd use negative fill to block the light from. Next, we're going to put in a rim light on the left hand side. Actually, no, we'll put a kicker in at the back. So this is just going to be a small light, which we'll use a disc light for. Call that rear light, and we're just going to rotate it. This is very unrealistic in a studio sense, because you couldn't have a light set up like this. Well, it would be very difficult to set a light up like this because of its position. You'd end up seeing it in the shot quite a lot, but again, because we're using a computer, this makes it a lot easier for us. And what this light is doing, if I just reduce the intensity, you'll see we're just using it to illuminate the liquid inside the bottle. And I'm going to actually stop it from affecting the ground plane in a moment, once I just get the right amount of value. Now I could actually light lick this light just to the liquid inside the bottle, but it does look a little bit weird when you do that sometimes, so I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to light link it so it doesn't have the floor in the shot. So we'll just quickly set that up now with our light linking. But I think this is getting sort of close to where I want it to be so far as the liquid being illuminated. Something else that you do with this sort of product photography is you can actually put a little light blocker in behind your bottle, so just a sort of cardboard cutout that's the same silhouette. You could actually do this with a mesh if you wanted to. You could extract some geometry from the back of the bottle and then just flatten it and use it as a mesh, or use it as a mesh light. But I think just using this light, because we can do it without it being visible, does a pretty good job. Alright, cool. So what we'll do now is we'll put in a rim light on the left hand side, and this is going to be large but very skinny. Because of the way that the bottle is going to reflect the light, it's going to have a lot of the same characteristics, and the reflection is going to have the same characteristics as the light, as you can see in this side here. So when we have this set on, you can start to see the difference it makes. And again, I'm going to light link that to the to not affect the ground. Okay, that's not too bad. So we will just want to make sure that that's roughly the same height as the bottle, because I want to make sure that that highlight is following all the way up, and we could actually move it to the rear just a little bit more. Yeah, so we get a proper rim. Now we need to adjust the value of it. Start with a value of 10, and we'll go back to looking at it now. Value only. And I thought I light linked that, but let me just restart that render. So you can see we're getting a nice strong rim light there, and then a softer sort of, you could almost call this a fill light, but because it's reflective it's a little bit hard to call it that. This is sort of more like a rim, and this is kind of like a key light, but it's sort of more like a shadow fill. But yeah, so that is starting to give us the impression of the bottle a little bit better. But what we're missing at the moment is the label. We can't really see it at all. So what we're going to do is put another spot in, and we're going to hit this label here with it. So we'll go back into our free perspective cam, and we will create another disc light, and this is going to be our label spot. And then again, we're just going to turn this into a spotlight by changing the cone angle, and I'm going to make it shoot down because I want the label to cast a bit of a shadow. You can't see the label on the geometry, but there is actually a bump map assigned to that label, so it sticks out a little bit. And then we just need to increase the value of it. Alright, so the value of increased it quite a bit here, and then you'll see it's still affecting the ground, but that's fine. We'll light link that again. But you can see it's getting a specular highlight on the front of the bottle, and I don't want that. That's not very nice. So what we can do is, because this light is only for the label, the first thing we're going to do is make it a bit softer, so we get a little bit more fall off on the outside of the spot. And then we're going to tighten it up, just hitting the label. Now if you want to do something a little bit sexy and have like these sort of cast shadows, they're pretty cool. You can actually do it. It's sort of up to you as to how you want to art direct it. Those sorts of shadows can be quite nice. Depends on what you're going for, mood and stuff. I'm just going to do this as a pretty standard sort of product shot, so we're not going to worry too much about that. I just want to make sure that everything on the label is essentially viewable, so the client is happy that all their product is visible. So that's probably about the width that I want. We'll do the light linking. Okay, so now what we need to do is make sure that we get rid of the specular highlight. However, this glass material and this label are on the same object, so I can't actually light link this away. However, this is a diffuse material and this is a specular material, so we can actually just quickly go into our refine lobe for our light and just reduce the specular amount. And trust me, if you were doing this in a studio and you had the ability to do that, you would be very happy. So it's good to be able to do these things virtually. What I want to see is a bit more of this area here illuminated, so we might need to just put another fill on the front there. We could just maybe use a downward spot or just a downward fill light. We'll have a look and see what happens with that. Alright, let's use a square overhead and point that downwards and just increase the scale of that. So I'm probably going to keep this foreground lighting because I kind of like that, and then just also keep the value in that, so we'll just maybe make it 5. That brings it back in. maybe we'll have to light that foreground separately. So again, we'll light link. Okay, and with this box diffuse, I've just moved it back a little bit and I've just increased the scale of it. And my objective here is to make sure that the label has a more clear silhouette, because this is generally what the focus of the image is going to be, because it's a product and we want to know what the product is. So by doing so, we've got this amber highlight here, which is giving the silhouette, making the silhouette of the right hand side visible, and the left hand side has got enough contrast there, so it's good. But this, because this side's a little bit more in shadow, a nice highlight there is going to help it, and then it blends into the rim light nicely, so that's not too bad. We might be a little bit on the bright side for this, but I won't mess around with it too much here. What I'd actually like to see here is more of illumination in the lower part of the bottle, and I'm probably going to do that with the rear lights. So okay, so what I've ended up doing is that rear light I've switched out for a square rather than a circle, and I've just increased the scale quite a bit. So now we can clearly see the difference between the liquid and the glass and the lid, and sort of wax material there. I could probably go and do a little bit more to the to this area here with another diffuse only light, which we could maybe just use this overhead. And then you just need to make a decision as to how much value you want there versus your light, versus your label, and then your rim lights, etc. Now the floor I didn't really talk about, but the floor is very straightforward material setup. All it is the pixel surface assigned to it. The color is white, but the face color, but it's also got a specular amount to it, and then the face color I'm just using as value to affect the intensity of it, and a little bit of roughness so we get a soft fall off in the reflection. So we'll just finalize the image very quickly here by adding depth of field, and I've already set up my focal distance for this shot, so yours will be different. You'll just need to ignore my f-stop because that's completely unrealistic, but because it's a fake camera and because it's a fake, I haven't set up my sizing and everything to be real world accurate. I would probably use something like, I'm guessing with a 100mm lens, maybe 5.6 just to get it fairly shallow, maybe even small like 2.8 f-stop to get a shallow depth of field, enough that we're keeping the entire bottle in focus, but enough that also the background is out of focus. So we're getting a little bit of variety. You can sort of see the value changes there just from having that noise applied to the background, and that's just helped the bottle stand out quite a bit there. And yeah, probably I'll just give that label a little bit more value. And yeah, this is very, very basic setup that you could use for this sort of photography. And like I said, this isn't a prescription as to how exactly you could do it. You can do this sort of setup with one light if you really want to, and there's a couple of different ways you could actually treat the bottle to make it look a little bit more like you would in photography. When you set up these bottles and things like that in a studio, oftentimes you treat them, which might be to add condensation and water droplets and things. But something else you can do is actually paint the bottle, the glass, with a matte spray paint, and that just makes it glow a little bit more. And I could show you how you might do that very quickly with a material. So this layer here is our glass shader, which is just reflection refraction up to 1.0, a little bit of roughness, and I think the IOR is 1.5. And what we can do is actually adjust the roughness so it sort of glows a little bit. We can use a ramp for that, and we'll run that into this is going to be refraction roughness. Alright, so plugging that in, you can already see the difference it's made because it's got a value of white, which is 1. So everything's rough, but we don't really want everything to be rough. We want it to be rougher to the water line essentially, or the liquid line, because the bottle should still sort of be transparent or translucent. So we'll add in a black, and we'll set that to constant just so we can find the line, and this will probably have to be T-ramp. Alright, and we've almost nailed it actually. So you can see it's rough right up to there, so we just need to push that up a little bit. Alright, now with the edge there set up to be roughly the same spot as where the edge of the liquid is, we're going to adjust the roughness. So we will select the white color, and then we're just going to lower the value of it. As you lower the value of it, it will lower the amount of roughness. Now, because we're changing the surface material, this is really going to change the way you'd need to light it quite a bit, because obviously these lights are way too harsh now and way too wide. But you can see that it sort of gives a nice glowy effect to the bottle, which might be what you're after, and it's going to soften any highlights and anything like that. So if you're looking for a more, if your client wants something more majestic looking, this is something you could do, and it's really common to do in a studio setup. Treating bottles, treating products, nothing's actually real, and you fix a lot of stuff in post as well. But doing it all in render, you can get pretty close in the render and then just do a couple of little things after the fact. Something else we could do is actually, there's a little bump map here with the logo of the brand, the Small Robot Whiskey. We could actually keep that as being non-rough, so it would stand out a little bit better from the liquid. But sort of you get the idea of what we're going for here, and that's something you can do on your own time. But yeah, that is my very brief overview on how you would use a studio setup to light a product. That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.